very much for that. Have you done that before somewhere? Good evening to you at home. Look, tonight I want to introduce you to the Thunderbirds. And if you don't know who or what they are, there are a lot of people here tonight who will very quickly fill you in. The Thunderbirds was one of the very early television science fiction shows. It went to air back in the 1960s. And the remarkable thing about it is that there were only 32 episodes ever made, but they've been repeated almost continuously ever since. So now, what, more than 25 years later, there's a whole army of dedicated Thunderbirds fans all over the world in more than 60 countries now, and they tune in religiously every week for yet another repeat of one of the Thunderbirds' adventures. And what's even more remarkable about this is that the Thunderbird characters are just very basic animated wooden puppets.
4, 3, 2, 1. Thunderbirds are go.
Calling International Rescue. Calling International Rescue. This is Carlville Hospital calling International Rescue.
Loud and clear, Carlville.
Go ahead.
The trial flight of the rocket was a complete success.
All fine.
The operation will proceed on Christmas Day as planned.
Thanks, Carlville.
What will be the rocket's ETA?
$900.
Right. We'll be ready at 09:15 to pick up the lucky winner.
Thank you, International Rescue.
Over and out.
Well, you get the general idea. It's all pretty simple stuff, but never mind. The Thunderbirds have been elevated to cult status, so none of that matters. There have been 2 feature films made as spin-offs from the television series, and 5 years ago, 2 young English actors, Gavin Robertson and Andrew Dawson, Andrew's the one with the glasses, devised a very clever theatre show based on the original characters. And they've been running with that almost continuously ever since. The show broke all kinds of records in the West End in London when it played there, and they've been packing the fans in all kinds of unlikely places during their Australian tour. But whatever you do, don't think this is unique, because it's not. As I think you'll discover tonight, fantasy and science fiction fans are part of a whole subculture. There are a lot of them, and they take themselves very seriously. There's a major science fiction convention, well, some of them do. There's a major science fiction convention somewhere in the world every week. And just to give you an idea of some of the groups that are here tonight, the Doctor Who fans. Where are the Doctor Who fans? Right. The Star Trek fans. Star Trek. Who else do we have here? We have Rocky Horror fans. What about the superheroes? Battalion, the Batman fan club. And Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Right. Well, OK, thank you for coming. Well, Gavin and Andrew, with all that rich vein to draw on, why did you choose the Thunderbirds as the source for your show?
Well, it's just something that we remembered from our youth, really. I mean, we grew up at the time when us and I guess everyone here is of a kind of broad spectrum of the same age, and we just remember watching it on TV. And we wanted to start a theatre company and work together. And it was just an idea that we got nostalgic about, and I think that's part of the key, is that you have one of those conversations where you're going, oh, do you remember the way with the strings? Oh, yeah, you remember that? Oh, the palm trees. Do you remember that? Oh, and you remember that? Oh, the rock. You know, so it's that whole thing. We thought, well, if we've got a nostalgia for it, other people must have it too.
But how do you cover all the characters in Thunderbirds with just the 2 of you?
By running around a lot and lots of costume with lots of Velcro on it, I think, and ripping them off.
Well, give us an idea, perhaps. I mean, I'm sure some of the fans here will have favourites that they'll want you to show. But what about, I mean, Lady Penelope seems to me to be the... How do you do Lady Penelope?
It's an interesting problem, but it was easily solved by asking Gavin to wear a blonde wig and a pink dress, which he did without... in fact, he doesn't...
No, I argued a lot.
And...
yeah, so we had the whole thing. We do a lot of it through mime, and a lot of it's, you know, very, very cartoony or very crass. So you have stuff like International Rescue, Lady Penelope speaking.
Hi, Penny. Jeff here. We got a hot one for you.
You know, so you have risk communication, and then you have they talk to each other via these things. You have Parker, you know, excuse me, lady, all those kind of characters. But a lot of it's kind of done. You almost cheat it, you know.
Yes.
And we tell the story using mime, so we set up the rickety bridge and the baddie who blows it up using a, you know...
Yeah, it's like a classic. We tried to make a kind of a classic episode.
Yes, so
not any particular episode, but kind of mixing them all up.
So it all relies heavily on imagination, and it all relies on the fact that pretty well everyone in your audience knows Thunderbirds intimately and all the characters.
Yeah.
But not so much, there's most of people come who have a vague memory of it, and we trigger more memories for them. Like, they don't remember the palm trees, but when you do it, they go, oh, my God, the palm trees. You know, they fall down. Why they didn't plant them further out? Not easy.
And so you get these, you get the movements, presumably, of these rather, they're very stilted
Yeah,
puppets, aren't they?
This is Captain Scarlet. Do you know Captain Scarlet?
You remember? Captain Scarlet, I mean, of course you have them.
He's short-sighted these days.
He is, yes. He's got glasses on. He's getting old. But the main problem is, of course, they hinge just from the shoulders.
Yes.
And they're always trying to stay off the floor. And every time they turn, they always left their head behind. And then the eyes go from left to right. And Captain Scarlet can never shoot straight, of course, because he always goes. So, you know, and that's how we show the puppet characters.
Pretty serious about it, really.
Yeah, very serious, I can see that. Well, what about some of you Thunderbird fans? I mean, Kerry Doherty, undoubtedly you've seen the show. How do you feel it measures up to the high standards that you fans have set for Thunderbirds?
I don't think you actually relate it in the same way. I enjoy it as a wonderful piece of entertainment. Whether it's as good as Thunderbirds is irrelevant. It's a great piece of entertainment in its own right. And it is a wonderful tribute to the show.
Yes. I mean, what is it about Thunderbirds that has turned it into a cult all over the world? I mean, 66 countries, isn't it?
Oh, probably more.
Yeah.
I've seen episodes of Thunderbirds, you know, translated into languages you wouldn't believe. You know, obscure African dialects and all kinds of things. It's been around, and like Doctor Who, it's been all around the world.
But what is it? What is it about Thunderbirds that singled it out like this?
I think there are two things. One is the technical brilliance of the production. Because, all right, you can laugh at the funny movements of the marionettes and so forth, but the special effects work was, in its day, virtually state-of-the-art.
Yes, I
And
suppose
it
you have
still
to keep
holds up.
remembering this is something that's 25 years old
That's
now,
right.
and only 32 episodes.
It was
Yes.
made, and so it's still holding up against even the much classier and much more expensive productions of today.
And Derek Meddings, who did a lot of the special effects, and is the guy who just finished doing the special effects on Batman. So, I mean, they've all gone on to do other things, Aliens and, you know, all those other kind of films that we now, that in a way, have replaced that.
Yes.
There's another aspect of it too, though, and I think that is that Thunderbirds has a very clear moral message. It says it is good to help people who are in trouble. That is a, you know, a worthwhile thing to do. And I think people respond to that general underlying message. It's not doesn't hit you in the face, but that is the underlying message. And what people here may not realise is that, in fact, there is now an organisation called International Rescue, which was inspired by this program.
By Thunderbirds.
And it is a British-based organisation composed of rescue specialists who go out, donate their time free, just like International Rescue. They go out anywhere in the world and assist in disasters. They've been to Italy, Armenia, Colombia, yes, various places. So, I mean, surely, if nothing else, that's a worthwhile reason for International Rescue and for Thunderbirds to have existed.
We actually created we did a benefit for them. So
For International
in
Rescue?
England, for the original.
Well, some of you others from some of the other clubs and so on, what is it about science fiction that's turned it into a cult like this?
I think that the reason is that science fiction isn't based on one thing, the written word. Science fiction started with books and reading and imagination. And it was in the 30s when people didn't have much money and they bought out what thing called pulp books. And also in the 30s, the greatest science fiction movies were made, the Frankenstein, the Dracula movies. So from that humble beginning when people needed an imagination, the 30s was the time of the Depression, that it's escapism, imagination, and it developed from that point. So,
what group are you with? I mean, what
Doctor Who.
You're a Doctor Who fan?
Yes.
Well, what is it about Doctor Who that's been so enduring? Because Doctor Who goes back a long way too.
Doctor Who goes back, yes. Doctor Who is enduring for a couple of reasons. One, it has been going for so long. 63 it started, 65 in Australia. But also it's an ongoing program. It's one of the few ongoing programs left. So as well as picking up nostalgia, you're also picking up new people, as well as children, adults, etc.
Professor John Tulloch, you're a Doctor Who fan, aren't you? You've also written a couple of books on Doctor Who. How long have you been watching Doctor Who?
Well, I watched the first episode in November 1963.
So you go right back to the very beginning.
I've seen most of it.
Well, what is it about Doctor Who, then?
Well, I'd like to pick up the points Dallas raised in order. The first point he made about the 30s, the early science fiction fandom, is I think they were a very special group of people in those days. They were technocrats from the middle class who really believed with H.G. Wells that science was going to change things. The world was going to drop its class wars and science would bring a utopia. That didn't happen, and I think the science fiction fans we've got now are very different sorts of people from those. Mm-hmm. Going back to the second point about Doctor Who, I think Doctor Who's been successful because it does what television wants done most, and that is to do something similar but something different. In other words, if you have a cop series which is declining in the ratings, you put in another similar program into the same slot, but it's got to be different enough to have freshness. What Doctor Who's managed is to do that within its own format, because it's had the regeneration relationship between the Doctors. You have something similar but something different, and that's gone through now 7 Doctors. And I think that probably makes it different from the other science fiction programs we're talking about here. But
how many others of you watch Doctor Who? Or is that everybody? We have dual membership of fan clubs here. I mean, anybody else want to tell me what it is about Doctor Who, or has this summed it up pretty well?
It can't be the special effects.
What is it about Doctor Who?
Oh, I think it's got a lot of scope. Like, science fiction has the most imagination in it. You can't have a love story with the kind of imagination you use in science fiction, and time travel is something that you can play around with endlessly. It's science fiction and fantasy is the most imaginative of the other kinds of
complete
writing.
escapism.
Yeah, you can play with it a bit more.
I don't think we should view it as escapism necessarily, though. Escapism implies that people use it as a way to get away from reality, that they can't cope with reality. And so they use it to escape, and I don't like the use of that term. I think that science fiction is a way of exercising the imagination, and if you want to call that escapism, fine, but you shouldn't view it as people wanting to escape from reality.
No, but many of you are incredibly dedicated, aren't you? I mean, tell us about, I understand that the fans, some of the Thunderbird fans that come along to see your show, I mean, they know all the lines, they're performing in the aisles.
Well, that's a kind of weird thing, though, because, I mean, then you're talking about somebody's response to the show as opposed to somebody's response to the original episodes. And obviously, it's the Thunderbirds which gets them there in the first place, but hopefully they come back time and time again because they like the show that we do. But yeah, they come in costume. In fact, when we were doing the costumes and trying to get them, we asked members of Fanderson, which is the Jerry Anderson fan club, how they did their own costume, because some of theirs are absolutely brilliant. So we got some tips on that from them, and they do the lines with us and some.
Well, how do you cope trying to do a performance on stage with a whole theatre full of people also doing the lines with you out there in the auditorium?
It's quite tricky when, you know, I'm Captain Scarlet in the audience having the gun battle with Mr. X, and Mr. X sees another Captain Scarlet in the audience. You know, which way do you go? I mean, it's quite difficult.
Oh, it's happened, you know, I've gone into the audience and I've got a gun on him and people can't just go...
And put guns on him.
So, you know, that makes it a bit tricky sometimes, knowing how to deal with that. But, I mean, you know, it's great. I mean, thank goodness people respond that kind of way, as opposed to just sitting there and going, you've destroyed my memories, get out.
The nicest moment for us, I think, in the show is like when Gavin has Thunderbird 2 on his head, and you know that the palm trees are about to arrive, and we know Gavin knows he's going to produce those palm trees, and the audience are waiting for it, or they don't know it's going to happen, and it's that moment of recognition is extraordinary, because night after night.
How do you explain this sort of dedication in a group of people? Or don't you? Are you just happy to see it?
I don't know, it's hard to work out why it is. I mean, nostalgia is vastly very strong, but it's difficult. I don't know. I think the people who are actually dedicated to it can probably answer that better.
Yes, I mean, it's undoubtedly escapism and wildly imaginative, but how much does it have to do with straight nostalgia? Because we're talking about the 60s with most of these things, aren't we? Doctor Who, Rocky Horror... Well, all right. Well, Rocky Horror does the same thing, don't you? Because you go along to the movie and you know all the lines from the movie.
Yeah. Rocky Horror, it's fun acting it out every week. It's not the movie, and it's not really science fiction that draws me to Rocky Horror. It's the way that you can react to it yourself. it's not got anything to do with science fiction for me.
I mean, do some of the lines from Rocky Horror for us.
The lines I can
What are
do
your
the whole
favourite
screen.
lines from Rocky Horror?
I like, it's not a Janet line, it's just in when they're doing the time warp and just a Transylvanian says, lovely party. That's just one line that sticks in my head. And when Frank's dying, the whole thing, it's just wonderful. There's not one best line.
But what is it about Rocky Horror that's got you stuck on Rocky Horror? I mean, has nothing happened since Rocky Horror that you thought was...
No.
Rocky Horror seems to be particularly... it's almost as though the film was made to have an audience do it in front of the film. The timing is just perfect. I mean, they give you enough time to run off and change costumes between scenes. It seems as though they made it for the sort of thing that we've turned it into. Not that we did it, that was done 10 years ago.
It's the attitudes that exist around it that make it wonderful.
Can you do the time warp for us?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You got to do the... Well, somebody can sing the music, can't they? I thought you knew. I thought you knew the soundtrack and the music.
we do.
The point is, we don't want to.
It's astounding, really, isn't it?
It's astounding. Time is fleeting. Madness. Pace is tall. We listen closely. Not very much longer. I want to keep control. Do it. Remember. Do the time warp. 1, 2, 3, 4. Drinking. Those moments when the blackness was in me and the voice would be calling. Let's do the time warp again.
It's extremely difficult to do when you sit in there.
I get the general idea.
If you'd like a better rendition, come on a
Come to
Friday
Hoyts on
night.
Friday
It's a
night.
Hoyts. A bit of a plug here, but who cares?
I want to know what a psychiatrist makes of all this. Professor Brent Waters. I mean, how do you explain this? Is it escape from the harsh realities of our life now? What is it? How do you explain this sort of dedication for things that, in the main, all happened in the 60s?
Well, I think there's two things. The first thing is it's not a new phenomenon. I mean, there've been fairy tales, myths, and things like that that have kept the links between one's past, one's childhood, and what's going on in your life as a grown-up for centuries. Those things have been around for a long time. These are, in some ways, high-tech myths, high-tech fairy tales, and the nostalgia for them, and the sorts of things that you were doing when you watched this stuff when you were a child, and the sorts of memories that you have of the play that revolved around them at the time, and the things you brought back to school the next day and traded stories about, and that. It's really powerful stuff in terms of nostalgia. But the other thing is the phenomenon of groups, of people getting together about it. And I think that's best seen as play. I mean, it's really sort of play for grown-ups. Yes, they've got a game, they've got a toy. One toy is called the Rocky Horror film. You know? And there's a whole bunch of other toys, and there's rules and stuff like that, and everyone has fun, and you've got roles, and you...
Yes, because, I mean, there seem to be two things here. There's either it's nostalgia for the 60s, or it's something much more than that. I mean, because science fiction goes back a lot further than the 60s, doesn't it? I mean, is it escapism? What is it? Is it people trying to get away from...
No, I think it enriches their lives, really. I mean, it taps that part of the soul that... some people tap a part of the soul that needs to play things out like that. Other people sort of tap into their soul by writing or by listening to music. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that's evocative and I think brings one back to one's roots and puts one in sort of communicating with other people at the same time. I think it maybe takes a special person, but to really get off on it. But
you don't, I gather.
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to apply any psychiatric labels to it. I mean, I think that really trivialises what's a lot of fun for a lot of people.
Yeah, so you said it's essentially a lot of fun. It's not necessarily people trying to escape from...
No, I don't think so.
But there's also this thing about, you know, why do some people like westerns? You know, I mean, that's another genre, but nobody kind of goes, oh, they like westerns.
You don't see labels.
But
you don't see
yes, they do. Yes, they do. Of course they do. There are clubs all over the place that people do that and they enact out films, etc., and do High Noon.
The gay clubs down Oxford Street.
No, but wait a minute, you people tell me, I mean, are you trying to escape from mundane lives in this existence into something more exciting and adventurous?
All fans escape from mundane lives. Do pop fans escape from mundane lives?
You
know, it's not just fantasy and science fiction that draws upon that kind of desire, that need. And also, you've got to remember that science fiction and fantasy are really well served by film and television in its earliest forms. Film, in fact, the first film was Medio's Trip to the Moon, a science fiction film.
Yeah, but see, a lot of you are actually living it out in a way, aren't you? I mean, it is different in a sense to people who are addicted to westerns, because I don't know that they actually live it out in the way that you Rocky Horror people do and other people do.
I have a famous quote from a guy who used to play Frankenfurter when it first started, and he said that Rocky Horror is a way to let yourself be whatever you want to be without anybody saying anything and without you having to worry about doing it.
There's an actual line in Rocky Horror that says, "Don't dream it, be it," which means if you want to do something, do it.
Yeah.
The show's telling you to go out and do it.
I think the other thing is you say, oh, it's the 60s. What is it's important about the 60s? I think it's the people who are kids, like most of the people here, who are kids during the 60s have now grown up. We are now the people with the disposable incomes who are buying cars and who are running society. And what was important to us then, a lot of us have remembered it. So, I mean, it's not special in the 60s. I mean, if you looked a generation back, it would have been the 50s. It's just that now the mainstream, the people who are, by and large, controlling things, are the people who grew up with Thunderbirds. And for that reason, it's important to us.
I think it's just something to do with the imagination. It's just that, like, you know, when your mother tells you a story and puts you, when you're going to bed at night when you're 4 or whatever, it's the fact that it is escapism, but not escapism as a derogatory term. I think that what you were saying about the fact that it's play is very important. You know, you kind of forget that. It's all this that we're sort of out to make a career and how much money have you got and what car do you drive. But there's nothing wrong with playing, and you're allowed to do that as a kid, and everyone goes, oh, look, you know. But if you play as an adult, somehow it's made to look a bit strange, but I don't see what's wrong with that.
There's also a thing about the fact as a group, being Thunderbird fans, is being able to share in-depth knowledge about a particular series or whatever it is the fact that as a group you study that series and you take in all that information and you know more about that series maybe than other people. But it's always fascinating. I mean, it's been fascinating for us. I mean, we weren't Thunderbird fans as such, but it's wonderful to meet Jerry Anderson and work with him on things and work with him on other projects and stuff. And you meet the guys who actually made the models and the puppeteer, and it's fascinating. And I think that's part of it as well, is that actually that kind of knowledge thing.
Pt.1, what do you make of all this?
Well, my view would be that science fiction is hardly trivial. It's extremely profound. And Alvin Toffler really said it best in Future Shock when he said that really science fiction is really the fiction of the future. Now, why does it appeal to us now? Well, it appeals to us now because we are a society in change, and societies in change have to confront new technology and new beings and new forms of life and new values, new lifestyles, all of this. And so really this science fiction is how society really starts to deal with the new ideals, the ideals that will become the norms and the reality of the future.
So is it escapism, or is it just...
It isn't escapism, no, it's much more profound than this. And in fact, remember, H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, they wrote during the Victorian time, a period of our history that was of tremendous societal change. Every view from biology, religion, everything was being questioned during the Victorian time, and that's when science fiction began. All of the concepts were being profoundly challenged so that people could actually deal with the societal changes.
Yeah, because we're really talking about two different things here, aren't we? We're talking about science fiction and we're talking about fantasy. And there's obviously a difference between the two.
If I might connect the two, or at least try to connect the two just for a second, it would be this, that societies have ideals and they have fantasies. Those two things are connected, because a fantasy is only an approximation of an ideal, whether it be an ideal society, an ideal hell, or an ideal antithesis, which is Rocky Horror Show, because it is every norm challenged. Time warp, Rocky Horror. Time is our most basic concept, and time warp and the challenge of that is exactly one of the major themes of Rocky.
Yes.
So,
well, Ian McLean, I mean, you're from Battalion, the Batman fan club, aren't you? I mean, what is it about Batman that is in any way related to all this?
I think an important factor too is that the original Batman show appealed on many levels. They were very clever scripts where the children watching the show watched it for action adventure. I remember I was in 4th class at school. I was riveted, and it was the action that I looked for. As a teenager, I looked back at the repeats and thought, they're making fun of this. And then as an adult, I was just in hysterics on the floor. You know, Phyllis Diller walked into one episode as a cleaning lady. I didn't know that as a kid, but as an adult, I thought, wow, you know. So you've got the multi-level, a whole family can watch the show and each member is getting something different out of it. And I guess it also adds to the communication too. The families can talk about the show, but they've all got something different out of it.
Yes, you see, I think a lot of people don't understand the dedication with which a lot of you pursue these interests, be it Batman or Doctor Who or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or Rocky Horror or whatever. How do you explain that? The dedication, the acting it out, the living it, the belonging to clubs, the reading every word that can be bought on the subject. How do you explain that?
I think that's a natural thing for all humans to want to belong to clubs. It's not just science fiction. You mentioned before pop groups, but there are things which people think are even today are strange, like bird spotters, train spotters, those sort of things. They belong to groups, they produce magazines, things like that. So it's not a thing which is peculiar to science fiction. Fandom, fans, is dedication, no matter where it is.
Yes, I mean, even football fans. There's no real difference in the I can't find the word I want. There's no real difference between a football fan belonging to a football club and a science fiction fan belonging to a science fiction fan club. They're doing it for the same ultimate reason, that they want to be with other people who share the same interest. And science fiction is your hobby, or football is your hobby.
We haven't heard from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy here.
What I just wanted to comment on what Dallas and Kerry were saying. I think there's a basic need with everybody to want to convey to people something they're enthusiastic about, to find somebody else that's just as enthusiastic. It's very satisfying to find someone that enjoys something as much as you do, and I think that's part of fandom. It's also a part of any other subculture, like pop cultures, things like that we were talking about.
And Star Trek. We haven't heard from Star Trek either. Where's Star Trek?
The best thing that I've found, that I've enjoyed the most about Star Trek is the creativity that goes on in it, the stories that the fans write and publish in their own fanzines and things. The artwork, just the thing for getting down and publishing. It's just...
Yeah, but I mean, Star Trek fans, I mean, of all of you, Star Trek fans are absolutely dedicated to it. I mean, how many times have you seen the Star Trek movies and the Star Trek television series and so on? It almost matches Thunderbirds, I think, doesn't it?
A lot of fans...
Karen Lewis.
I think it does. I feel Star Trek's more an adventure thing. That's my own personal opinion.
What, you lose yourself in the adventure with Star Trek?
Yeah, I think so, and the fact that people are out there in space, we know we'll be there one day, and it's just, you feel, I'm going to be there in the future. I will be there.
All right, well, you talk about, you know, everybody needing to belong and wanting to share the enthusiasm for something. I mean, do you get anything serious out of this for your real lives in the fantasy and the escapism and the adventure and so on?
Absolutely. You have friends to discuss it with. You play little games with each other and...
You certainly do.
Well, you've seen our show.
They're getting stuff out of it. There are people who belong to fandom who've gone on to do other things, become, wouldn't say famous, but have done work. There's one person here who's written scripts for the ABC who's a fan, up the back there. There are other people who've written books about the program but moved on. A lot of Doctor Who fans in England are now writers for doing other programs. Their interest in television, Doctor Who brought them to television, but you can't live on an interest in one program, so they've gone on to look at the other television, and now they're working in that.
Ian McLean, what do you get out of it?
Well, I can speak from my own experience, but I know a lot of other people here might have felt the same, that as a young science fiction addict, you often felt a bit alone because the people around you thought you were a little bit weird for reading those books when everyone else was outside playing football. And then if you can discover fandom, other people who like the same things that you like, you've suddenly got a whole lot of new friends. And, you know, you join a large science fiction club, you've got 200 friends.
So you escape, but you belong.
Yeah.
You wanted to make a point?
Yeah, it seems the only problem with science fiction, especially if you're a teenager, you sort of keep it quiet that you like science fiction, because otherwise you get teased and all that. And
even worse if you read comics.
Because people think you're kooky.
Yeah, so you've got to sort of keep a hush on it. But with fan clubs, you get to meet other people who are interested
Mm.
in the same sort of programs, and it's good, and you don't get teased.
Pt.1, do you think people get anything serious out of this in their real lives? Is it part-
Absolutely.